Um, Hello everybody and welcome to the World's Millennium Center. I hope you've been having a great day so far. My name is Mariangela Veronesi, and today, as part of the Cardiff Science Festival, I am going to talk to you about quite an unusual matter. It's a subject that has fascinated, confused, potentially disgusted, but certainly inspired a lot of people. Ladybirds and gentle beetles, grubs and weevils, welcome to the wonderful world of edible insects. Yes, I did say edible insects. Those tiny, creepy, crawly, and I would add crunchy little things. Now, I know how to some of you this might actually sound like the worst nightmare. We've all heard the story about how supposedly 5 spiders crawl into your mouth every single night, but surely that's just a myth, right? But this is nothing like that. For a lot of people around the world, edible insects are a really important form of nutrition. And that is what brings me here today. Almost a year ago, I had the opportunity to participate in a really interesting project about edible insects in the context of food insecurity. And this project took place in Benin, West Africa, over 2 months, and is simply called Bugs for Life. So let me tell you a bit about what we're going to go through today. First of all, I'll give you a little introduction on edible insects and what they mean in the context of food insecurity. And then Benin is not necessarily the most well-known country in the world, so why don't we learn a bit more about that? And finally, I'll go through what kind of things we learned for our research. You'll learn more about the communities that we worked with, about how they collect and prepare and eat insects, and what this means in terms of fighting malnutrition, and whether this practice can actually expand beyond these communities. So, although insect eating might seem quite unusual here, in the world about 2 billion people already have insects as part of their everyday diet. 1,900 species have already been found, but surely that's just a very conservative number. Probably there's thousands more insects that are already eaten in the world. And the main ones include beetles, caterpillars, ants, bees, grasshoppers, crickets, locusts. There's just so many different types of insects that can be eaten. You could fill pages and pages of recipe books with it. So let me tell you a handful of these bug stories from around the world. One of the main insect-eating regions is Southeast Asia. And in the past, this used to be mainly like just a rural practice, but with time, and especially through migration, insect eating has expanded into cities and is now extremely popular. So if you're just strolling down, downtown Bangkok, you can stop by the market, and as you're buying your mangoes and your vegetables and your rice and everything else, you could stop by the insect stall and, try a few scorpions, or why not a few grasshoppers, as you do on a normal Sunday. You might want to pull out your bargaining skills. I'm not very good at that, which is why I never get a good price from my locusts, but, what can I do? Work in progress. So this has actually become quite popular with tourists. You see quite a lot of pictures from these incredible scorpions or whatever. But it's actually also a resource for not only tourists, but people that actually live there. And the FAO has really promoted this and promoted the rearing of insects as a source of nutrition and income. And now edible insects, for example, from Thailand, are exported all over the world. One of the most widespread groups of insects that are eaten are beetles, and in particular, it's usually the larvae of beetles that are eaten instead of the adult form. And one of the most popular ones is the palm weevil. And this is found in a lot of countries throughout 3 different continents. And there's an interesting technique to know when it's the right time to harvest these larvae. So, for example, in Cameroon, Cameroon, it's the women that are in charge of this. And the larvae usually develop in palm trees that have undergone some sort of damage. And sometimes they're actually felled on purpose so that the larvae will nest in them. And so the women go to the palm trees and put their ear onto the tree and listen for the noise that the larvae will make. And to an expert ear, this will tell you whether it's the right moment for harvesting. Of course, if I did it, I would just stand there for hours with a face of total confusion and you'd never get any larvae out of me. But fortunately, some people are much better at it. Another really popular insect in Africa and in different places is one that has been known since, biblical times as one of the world's greatest agricultural pests, and that is the locust, as locust invasions destroy a lot of agricultural fields. Now, I have a friend from Uganda, and he told me all about the technique to catch locusts during a huge locust invasion. All you have to do, all you need really is a frying pan. So you take your frying pan, and when you see the huge storm of locusts arrive towards you, you just stick your hand out the window, and you wait. And the locust will just fly directly in it. It's that easy. You then have to take this pan and whack it onto the fire, and there you go. In not long, you have your perfect locust fryer, ready for consumption. So you could either, eat it directly, all for yourself, or you could go down to the street and sell it at one of the street stalls. And my friend was saying that that's kind of the usual snack you would have, after work or during a break or something like that. If you ask me, that's what I call pest management. I mean, if those locusts think that they can come and destroy all your fields, I say, why don't you go and eat them first? See what they think about that. And in Thailand, this has actually been promoted by the government as a pest management technique. And during the locust invasion, the number of locusts has been really kept down, and it's been much more effective than insecticides. And of course, a lot of people had the opportunity to have a huge amount of locusts. Another country where insects are very popular is Mexico, and there's many different kinds that are found there. There's this caterpillar, which is considered a delicacy by farmers, and they collected them while they're doing other farming activities, and then at the end they would eat them with a spicy sauce and on tortillas. And the most popular insect in Mexico probably is the chapulines, and they can be found on street stalls once again, and they could be eaten in all sorts of ways, but for example, they could be eaten with tacos and with tortillas, like in the form of tacos in certain regions. Now you can find this in Mexico, but now you can also find it in the US. And this is thanks to a really entrepreneurial girl that started her own street stall in California, and it's called Don Vito. So there's kind of like modern versions of this. She'll do, for example, burritos with grasshoppers, or she'll even have a Mexican ice cream topped with mealworms. So, that's an interesting version of Tex-Mex. And there's many, many other ways that insects can be eaten. And nowadays, you could even find them on the internet. And in fact, that is what I did today. You could also rear them at home. If you wanted to cook away, you could do that. And I brought a few with me. They come in packets like this one. And my colleague is going to pass some over to you if you want to have a look, or if you want to have a try, just go for it. If you don't want to have a try, that's okay, don't worry. So, a lot of these entomophagy practices, so entomophagy is actually the eating of insects. A lot of them have been around for a very long time. So, the question is, why are we suddenly so interested in insects? How come we never approached the issue before? And what was the push to actually start having a look at it? Well, today, as most of you will know, we are facing a situation of global food insecurity. And this does not only mean an insufficient quantity of food, but it's also a problem in terms of diversity, accessibility, and affordability. And we live in quite a changing world. I mean, when my grandmother was born, there were fewer than 2 billion people on Earth, and in her lifetime, that number more than tripled. And as human population grows, the pressure on resources becomes an imminent problem, and finding sustainable solutions to food security becomes a priority. For this reason, researchers, scientists, nutritionists have turned towards traditional practices to try to uncover potential solutions to the problem of food security. And entomophagy seemed to be quite an appealing option. This is because insects actually have many advantages. First of all, they have a low environmental impact compared to traditional forms of livestock. Just think about how many resources you need just to rear a cow, just to rear cattle and livestock in general. It's been estimated that 70% of all agricultural land goes just towards livestock. That's as if you took both of the Americas and completely filled them with animals just to feed us. Now think of how much you need for an insect. You don't need much land for the actual insects. And in terms of feed, they actually need 12 times less than cattle. So, you know, that's a huge gain in efficiency. And don't even get me started on greenhouse gas emissions. Cattle produces a huge amount, and livestock accounts for 18% of these emissions worldwide, whereas there are very few insects that actually produce a significant amount of greenhouse gases. So that's one extra point for the insects. They're also incredibly nutritious. I mean, they're just packed with protein and micronutrients such as minerals and vitamins. And this might seem hard to believe, but actually 100 grams of grasshoppers has more protein than a steak. So yeah, instead of having your usual steak, you should just have loads of grasshoppers, and that will give you much more protein. So if you want to work out or anything, grasshoppers are definitely the answer. And if you're vegetarian and don't usually go for animals, consider that 100 grams of crickets actually has the same quantities has comparable nutritional values to tofu, for example. Edible insects are also really easy to rear. It's quite a low-cost thing to do, and you don't need a lot of technology. It can be done really simply, and a lot of people do it kind of in their backyard. It's not just a rural practice, it can be easily done in the city. In fact, it can become a upcoming form of urban agriculture. And because they reproduce really quickly, you can just more or less have a constant production. Also, insects are they're available absolutely worldwide, and they're the most successful animal group. There's about 1 million estimated insects. So if you've tried one and don't really like it, it's okay, don't worry, you have 999,000 other ones to try from, so do not despair. So because of all these incredible properties, a lot of attention has been directed towards them to solve kind of global food insecurities. But we thought, given all these aspects that they have, that it could actually be a really good solution for specific areas that suffer from food insecurity and malnutrition. It would be a low-cost, sustainable, and available resource to tap into. And that is what brought us to Millennium. Now, before I tell you more about the actual research, allow me to tell you a bit more about the founding story of Bots for Life. Now, I have a very good friend called Laura, and we've been friends for a really long time, since we were kids. And when the time came to go to university, we chose radically different paths. I mean, she did entomology, biology and then entomology, and I did international development. There was no chance of us ever possibly working together. Our professional routes just were not meant to meet. Or in any case, that's what I thought. Until one day, I received a phone call from her. And she was saying all sorts of nonsense, that culminated with her saying, "Do you remember how I talked to you about edible insects? Well, I am going to go to West Africa, and I am going to do a research project on edible insects." Now, I'm really good at handling insects. I can totally do that. But actually talking to people and getting information from them, I have no idea how to do that. I mean, I sometimes talk to insects, but they don't tend to reply to me and give me all sorts of anthropological information. So what do you say? Are you coming to Benin? And I accepted immediately. I didn't even know the ins and outs, and the how, and the why, and the very important with which money. All of that didn't matter. I knew some way we would make this work. This was definitely a worthwhile research, and we were going to make it. So with this kind of positive attitude, along with another fellow and friend entomologist called Rudy, we dived into the world of grant applications and crowdfunding and all this, mesmerizing and wonderful, world. And along the way, there was an important addition to our team. And Craig McFarlane joined us as our science communicator because we wanted to spread the message of edible insects and of our research to the public, which means that, of course, he should be here today. But he's off in Scotland science communicating over there, so you get me instead. I think I might end up adding it to my CV, Marianne Children is a part-time science communicator. I think that sounds good. So after several months of preparation, after, gathering the funds and buying the tickets and getting all sorts of vaccines and visas and all those things, and in vain trying to reassure our moms that everything would be okay, that was kind of, that was not going to happen, but, we gave it a go. We were finally ready to leave, and our international, intergender, interdisciplinary super team was finally ready to set off to Benin. Now, I promised I would tell you a bit more about Benin. Benin is located on the West African coast, and it is found between Nigeria and Togo. And it is actually one of the poorest countries on earth, and one of the main issues it's faced with is that of food insecurity. And the economy is strongly reliant on agriculture, either for export or for subsistence. And there's very significant economic differences between the north of Benin and the south of Benin. This is because the south has access to the sea, has access to ports, has access to exports and imports. And they also have a very different climate to the south, to the north. They have a very fertile agriculture. They get 2 rainy seasons and 2 dry seasons, which means they can harvest twice. So if one harvest goes wrong, then you always have the other one. And their agriculture is simply much more diversified. In contrast, the north is much more arid, and it's a semi-desertic area. And here agriculture is much more difficult. There's tendentially less products. And, sorry, could we have that? So there's tendentially less products. And there's only one harvest during the year, which means that if something happens during your harvest, then this has devastating consequences in terms of food security. Therefore, malnutrition is much more severe in the north, and about half of the children suffer from chronic malnutrition. It is also in this very challenged and it is in this poor and challenged region that we found one of the communities that eats the most diversified number of insects. And this is the Wama community of North Benin. In fact, not all communities eat insects in Benin, and not all communities eat insects in the north. It is very, very, very linked to the ethnic group specifically. Now let me tell you a bit more about the Wama. We visited 2 Wama settlements specifically for the research, but got to stay in the area and visit other ones while we were there. And the 2 settlements we were staying in were called Koso and Kutiaku. And the Wama live in small, close-knit communities where traditions are extremely important, where family is extremely important. And the passing down of these traditions is an extremely important aspect of social life. And one of these traditions that is passed down is the eating of insects. Now take into account that they really rely on non-mechanized subsistence agriculture. So if ever there's a bad harvest, a drought or a flood, this really has a strong impact on their availability of food. Now, the eating of insects is traditionally carried out only by children, and it is done during their leisure time. Let me tell you about one of the most memorable moments of the research in Benin. This was our first insect hunt in Kosovo. So we had visited the village the day before just to talk to the community, tell them what we were doing there, you know, learn a few Wama words that we would attempt to use throughout the 2 months. So we had more or less met them and done our introductions and started to, you know, get familiar with the place. But the next day was when it would really start. This is when we'd have the opportunity to finally go on our first insect hunt. So we were greeted by the village chief, and at his signal, all these other little insect hunters started appearing all around us. And it was just an incredible moment because the curiosity and eagerness to discover from one another was just filling the air, and we'd waited so long to actually be able to be there and know what it was all about. But on their side, they were really curious too, because in Benin, eating insects is only done by certain minorities and is generally looked down upon, so they don't really have the opportunities to say, you know, look at how cool this is, I get to eat insects and this is how it's done. It's just something that is not valued enough. So for them to have the opportunity to actually show, you know, tell somebody about the traditions and show them really was, you know, a great experience. So at Isma's signal, that's how it all started. Suddenly, you had all these children running around into the fields and no insect could be spared. They looked through trees, fields, rivers, burrows, absolutely everywhere. No insect could possibly escape. And the reason for which they would look absolutely everywhere is that they eat a huge variety of insects. They eat about 17 different species. So, you know, you have to look in different places for different insects. So the mole cricket will be found underneath the mango tree, or you'll go to the river to find a water beetle, or very interestingly, they also eat ticks that are found on cows. So you have to find the cow herding ethnic group, because that's another ethnic group, and, you know, like, find where they are and then ask them if you can take the ticks from the cows, which is usually appreciated because ticks are not good for cows. So there's kind of little collaborations going on over there. But they eat other insects. In total, they eat chafers, they eat grasshoppers, crickets, they eat beetles, they eat ticks. They just eat a huge, huge, huge variety. Even some insects that we found some insects that weren't officially even recorded in Benin. I mean, of course they were there, but they hadn't just been officially recorded yet. So after all this like intense insect hunting all over the place, they all gather usually in one hut, where the insects are prepared by the children too, and then they're all shared between them. So usually you take the insects and you remove the less appetizing parts. You know, for one it might be like the head or the legs or the wings. It depends which parts, you know, of the various species of insects. And then there's 2 different ways you could cook them. Well, 2 main ways you could cook them really. One is to grill them over charcoal, and usually they're skewered, so you could have some sort of like cricket kebab kind of thing. Or alternatively, you could have them sauté in shea butter and with some local spices and some salt. So those are the 2 main ways in which kids prepare insects. And then one thing that was really quite incredible for us, it's probably very normal there, but every single insect was usually the oldest kid would take the insects and then they cut the insects and divide them between them. So every single insect had to be shared, and everybody got insects, even the smallest kids that had not participated in the hunt. So in this way, the older kids provide food and organize the food for everybody else. So for the Wama, collecting and eating insects is more seen like a traditional game and a super entertaining way to grab a snack, rather than, you know, a way to supplement your less nutritional meals. That's not exactly how they see it. So the question is, how does this actually contribute to overall improving livelihoods? The first way is, well, through the nutritional aspects. As we said, edible insects are really high in a lot of in protein and a lot of micronutrients, and there's certain deficiencies that are really strong in that area, such as iron, which can be found in many of these insects. And the fact that they share every single insect means that you get a whole range of insects. You get a huge variety, so if one insect doesn't have this specific micronutrient, you can be sure that the other one will. And it's really positive that for them it's a game, that for them it's an entertaining thing that they feel like doing, and that they end up gathering their own sources of protein, independently of how rich or poor your family is, independently of whether they work all day or whatever they have to do, the children can provide for themselves. And this is really particularly important because there's a lot of food prohibitions. So sometimes it's believed that it's not good for children to eat eggs or to eat meat because of some belief. And in this way, they can provide themselves with protein. And we didn't have the capacity in our research to do a full-fledged nutritional analysis, but it was striking to see that there was a visible difference in the children from the insect-eating villages as opposed to the non-insect-eating villages. They were visibly less malnourished, and yeah, it was quite impressive. There's also economic benefits to insect eating and insect selling. Most of the insects collected by the Wama are just for self-consumption, but there's one type of insect that really shows us the potential of insects as a product that can be sold. And these are winged termites. They're only seasonal. They come out in August, so in less than a month's time in Benin, they'll be full of winged termites, and I'll probably be thinking of that while I'm here. And because they come in huge quantities, they're much easier to collect. You need a bucket of water and a light that attracts them, and while they're attracted to the light, they just fall inside the buckets of water and they're trapped there, so you can harvest a huge amount. And these are not just eaten by children, it's quite different. They're harvested by adults, they're eaten by adults, they're also eaten by non-Wama people, they're eaten by urban people. It's a really successful and popular insect. And it's not only seen as a snack, it's integrated in sauces, it's just much more advanced, it's integrated to meals. And one of the main differences between these termites and everything else that sets them apart and makes them sellable is that they come in big quantities. So this has been identified as an important fact to actually making a living out of insects. Speaking of which, well, for the moment, entomophagy is quite underdeveloped in Benin in general, as opposed to other countries in the region or throughout the world, and it's really localized. And unfortunately, this practice is also in decline, partially because of school rates increasing, which for every other reason is a great thing. But for edible insects, it's just not great because it means that children have less time to roam the fields and collect insects. And with this method, there's no guarantee that there's actually enough, that you can actually gather enough insects to fulfill all your nutritional needs. So one of the options is to consider rearing the insects, which is done in a lot of countries already. And this might be a way to ensure that your nutritional and potentially economic needs are fulfilled. So when we were looking at the potential of this idea, we were considering two scenarios. One could be a much more small-scale rearing that could be managed by the community itself. And the other idea, so it would be really localized production and for the community itself, maybe in places where insects are already eaten. Another idea would actually be more ambitious and would be to develop a natural edible insect industry, with proper production plants that could even package and distribute insects, which is already done in other countries. In Burkina Faso, which is right next door, you can find edible insects in the supermarket, for example. And this, if you have an insect-producing plant, this could even lead on to developing specific products for malnutrition that could be distributed in nutritional centers, for example. So, once you take the idea and you think of all the options, there's just so much to do. But for edible insects to become a more common sight in Benin, like for every other product, you need a market. And for a market to be there, supply and demand have to match. Now, at the moment, there's problems on both sides. We did quite an extensive work on this, and there's all sorts of, there's all sorts of issues, and a lot of detail can be found in the reports. I'll just go through this quickly because I want to focus on another point which might be more neglected. It's the usual things that you need for any type of product. You need more R&D, you need extensive funding, you might need government support, you need the appropriate infrastructure in place, not just for production but also for distribution. And on the demand side, you need to either maintain the culture of entomophily or you need to build up an awareness and just a taste for insects and more knowledge about them, and also give people the opportunity to try them. So for example, public demonstrations. So those are more or less the kind of things that you would need. But there's another point that I personally want to stress on, and that is the idea of community engagement. Not just on the small scale, but also on the large scale. If the issue is that you want to provide a sustainable and affordable nutritional resource, you need to make sure that the people you're actually addressing are involved in this process and participate in it so that the product can really suit their needs. For maybe a more large-scale industry, this would mean involving them a lot in the development of the product, doing a lot of testing, taking their input because they will probably know more about it than you, really. So to have a learning process. And at the small scale, that's also extremely, extremely important because not only together you can understand more what the community actually wants to eat, what they think is a good idea, but also things like how do they want to manage it? How are the benefits going to be distributed? Is it going to be, I don't know, the men, the women, the children, or even things like where is it located in the village? Because in a lot of African villages, the distribution, the planning of it does mean something. The houses are placed by family or placed in a specific way, so you can't just place the insect rearing facility wherever you want. There has to be a consensus over which the best place would be for this to be placed. Or for example, the structures, it would be really important for them to be made in local materials. So if this worked, they could just replicate them instead of having rearing facilities imported from Europe or the US or wherever, because if it does pick up, then great, you just need to import another one from Europe. It would be much more useful for them to actually be able to build their own. Now these are just some ideas, and hopefully one day Benin will become another insect, a strong insect consuming and producing country. So these two projects I mentioned, that of having a small local project and a larger project, Bugs for Life has been trying to promote these two ideas, and we're working to hopefully turn this into a reality and start putting more insects on the menu. Thank you so much for the attention. And I would like to also say thank you so much to the communities we worked with, because they really opened their houses and their hearts to us, and none of this would have been possible without them. So thank you a lot to them, and thank you all for listening.